Hello, dear friends. Welcome back to our channel where we learn English through powerful real-life stories. Today, we begin the biography of a man who changed the world with his mind, Sir Isaac Newton. He faced pain, loneliness, rejection, and poverty. But he also found truth, light, and the secrets of the universe. This is his journey. Let's begin with his early life, full of struggles and silence. Chapter 1. The Lonely Beginning. Isaac Newton was born on January 4th, 1643, in a tiny village called Woolsthorpe in Lincolnshire, England. But his life almost ended before it even started. Newton was born prematurely. That means he was born too early, and he was very, very small. So small that people said he could fit inside a teacup. Nobody believed he would survive. His father, also named Isaac Newton, had died 3 months before he was born. So baby Isaac entered the world as an orphan in a freezing winter during a violent storm. Many thought he would die in a few hours, but he lived. This was the first miracle in the life of a boy who would go on to change the world. Isaac's mother, Hannah Newton, was heartbroken after her husband's death. When Isaac was just 3 years old, she left him. She married a man who didn't want a child, so she left little Isaac with his grandmother. For nearly 9 years, Isaac didn't live with his mother. This deep pain stayed in his heart forever. Later in life, Newton once wrote in his notes that he wanted to burn down his mother's house. It was not because he hated her. It was because of the pain he had carried for years, feeling abandoned and unloved. Isaac was not like other children. He was very quiet. He didn't enjoy games or group activities. He was often alone, but in that silence, something beautiful was happening. He was always watching, observing, asking questions. He loved to build things. He made tiny water wheels, sundials, and even a wind-powered machine. He was not just playing, he was experimenting. Even as a child, Newton was beginning to understand the world around him, one question at a time. At the age of 12, Newton went to the King's School in Grantham. At first, he was a poor student. He wasn't very social and didn't do well in class. One day, a student bullied him and even beat him in front of others. Newton was embarrassed, but instead of fighting back with fists, he made a promise to himself. I will become better, smarter, stronger. I will rise. From that day, everything changed. Newton started reading more than anyone else. He stayed up late at night, solving math problems and reading science books. Within months, he became the top student in his class. This was the first time Isaac Newton transformed pain into power. Just as Newton's future began to shine, something unexpected happened. His mother pulled him out of school. She wanted him to be a farmer, just like his father had been. She thought science and books were a waste of time, but Newton was not made for the fields. When he worked on the farm, he would often get lost in his thoughts. He would forget to feed animals. He would stop working just to look at the stars or study water flowing through rocks. Clearly, farming was not his calling. One day, an uncle visited and saw Isaac's talent. He said to Hannah, "This boy belongs in school, not on a farm." And so, Newton returned to school. And this time, for good. In 1661, at the age of 18, Newton entered Trinity College, Cambridge. He studied philosophy, math, and science. He came from a poor family, so he worked as a servant in the college to pay for his studies. While other students were partying, Newton spent hours and hours alone, reading, thinking, writing. But something terrible was about to happen. In 1665, a deadly disease called the Great Plague spread across England. The university had to close. Newton had to return to his village for 2 years. It sounds like a break. But these 2 years became the most productive time of his life. While the world was suffering, Newton was discovering. He invented calculus. He built early versions of telescopes. And yes, He began thinking deeply about gravity. Let's talk about one of the most famous moments in science history. One day Newton was sitting in the garden of his home. He saw an apple fall from a tree, and then he asked the question that would change everything. Why did the apple fall straight down? People had seen apples fall for thousands of years, but no one asked why. Newton wondered, what force pulls the apple to the ground? Does this force only work on Earth? Or could it reach the moon, the planets, even the stars? This was the birth of the idea of gravity. It took him years to develop the full theory, but that apple moment was the spark. Before Newton, people believed strange things about motion. Some thought the Earth didn't move. Others believed objects just wanted to fall. Newton changed that forever. He discovered that gravity is a force that pulls things toward each other. It pulls the apple to the ground. It keeps the moon around the Earth. It keeps the Earth around the sun. This idea was written down in 1687 in his book called Philosophiae Naturalis Principia Mathematica, or just Principia. In it, he explained his three laws of motion, and he showed that the entire universe works like a giant machine, a machine made not by magic, but by math and laws. Chapter 2. The Secret Years That Shaped a Legend. When Isaac Newton returned to his family home in Woolsthorpe during the plague, the world outside was in fear. People were dying, shops were closed, universities were silent, and families were locked inside their homes. But inside Isaac's small room, something powerful was happening, not with tools or noise, but with silence, thought, and imagination. This time in his life is now called the Year of Wonders. It was a period of deep thinking, personal growth, and world-changing ideas. While others saw danger, Newton saw discovery. He was just in his early 20s, a young man. But his mind was already working in ways the world had never seen. During these 2 years, he worked on three areas that would change science forever: mathematics, optics, and motion. He didn't share his ideas immediately. In fact, many of them stayed in his notebooks, quietly waiting. But the ideas were already born, and they were powerful. He began thinking more deeply about calculus, a new kind of math that helps us understand change, motion, and speed. Although there were others working on similar ideas at the time, Newton's approach was unique. He didn't publish his work then, but he kept writing, calculating, and understanding how nature worked through numbers. At the same time, he was also studying light. Newton had always been curious about color and vision. He wondered, what is light made of? Why do we see colors? When he passed light through a glass prism, something beautiful happened. The white light turned into a rainbow. Red, orange, yellow, green, blue, indigo, and violet spread out across the wall. This was more than just a pretty sight. It was proof. Newton realized that white light was not just one color. It was a mix of many. Each color had a different angle of bending, or refraction. Before Newton, many people believed that light got colored by touching objects. But Newton showed that color was already inside the light. It was one of the first big steps in understanding how light and vision really work. But the biggest discovery growing in his mind was about gravity. The apple story, the one everyone knows, had become a seed of something larger. Newton started thinking about how things move, not just on Earth, but in the sky. He wondered if the same force that made the apple fall also held the moon in orbit. Could it be possible that the force pulling an apple to the ground was the same force keeping the planets in place? Most people at that time believed in different rules for the heavens and the earth. They thought the sky followed its own mysterious logic, different from everyday life. But Newton believed in something else. He believed that the entire universe, from apples to stars, followed the same laws. He just needed to prove it. In the quiet village of Woolsthorpe, without a formal lab or support from a university, Newton began laying the foundation for the universal law of gravitation. He wrote down notes, tried experiments, and performed mental calculations that linked the Earth to the sky. His work was not perfect yet, but it was revolutionary. When the plague finally ended and Newton returned to Cambridge, he was no longer just a student. He was a thinker with ideas far ahead of his time. Even though Newton was shy and didn't like attention, his work soon began to attract notice. In 1669, when he was only 26 years old, he became a professor at Cambridge. The position was called the Lucasian Professor of Mathematics, one of the highest roles at the university. Later, this same position would be held by great minds like Stephen Hawking. Newton didn't teach like other professors. He was quiet. He didn't enjoy public speaking, and sometimes no one came to his lectures. But still he worked. He continued to develop his theories, study light and optics, and refine his understanding of motion. One of his biggest passions during this time was building a better telescope. At that time, telescopes were large and unclear. Newton used mirrors instead of lenses, creating a more powerful and smaller telescope. This design is still used today and is called the Newtonian telescope. In 1672, he became a member of the Royal Society, the most respected scientific group in England. That same year, he shared his discoveries about light and color, but not everyone agreed with him. Another scientist named Robert Hooke strongly criticized his ideas. This moment hurt Newton deeply. He didn't like conflict, and he began to avoid public arguments. For years, he refused to publish more of his work. He kept working privately, writing notes and solving problems, but he stayed quiet. This was a difficult time for him. He was full of ideas but afraid of judgment. He had seen what criticism could do to a man's confidence. Still, his mind never stopped moving. He was solving problems in silence. Problems the rest of the world hadn't even begun to think about. His notebooks from this time are filled with diagrams, formulas, and observations. They show a man who was trying to connect every dot in the universe. He wanted to understand how everything worked, from falling apples to rising tides, from the colors of the rainbow to the motion of planets. He believed that God had created the world with order, and that order could be discovered through science. Newton didn't see science and faith as enemies. He believed that understanding nature was a way to understand the Creator. This deep belief gave him strength. Even when he was alone, misunderstood, or afraid, he kept going. Years later, another challenge would come, one that would push Newton out of the shadows and into the spotlight. It would start with a question from an old friend, and it would end with the greatest scientific book in history. But before that, Newton had to make a choice. Would he keep his genius hidden forever, or would he finally share it with the world? That decision would define the rest of his life, and the world would never be the same again. Chapter 3: The Book That Changed the Universe. In the quiet corners of his study at Cambridge, Isaac Newton sat alone for many years. His room was filled with books, papers, half-finished experiments, and silent thoughts. Outside, the world had no idea of the greatness growing inside. Newton had made discoveries that could reshape science itself, but he was still afraid to publish them. He feared what other scientists might say. The memory of being publicly criticized by Robert Hooke still stung. Newton had once shared his theory of light, and Hooke had quickly attacked it. After that, Newton closed his heart like a locked door. For nearly a decade, he chose silence over conflict. But then something changed. A friend named Edmund Halley, a respected scientist and member of the Royal Society, visited Newton in 1684. Halley had been thinking about planetary orbits. He wanted to understand why planets move in oval paths around the sun. When he asked other scientists, no one had the answer. But someone said, ask Isaac Newton. He may know. So Halley made the journey to Cambridge. He asked Newton a simple question. What kind of force could cause a planet to move in an elliptical orbit? Newton didn't blink. He answered calmly, it's gravity. Halley was shocked. But how do you know? Newton replied, I calculated it. A long time ago, Halley asked to see the papers. Newton searched through his old notes, found the calculations, and began to realize something important. These weren't just small thoughts. These were the laws of the universe. Halley was amazed. He begged Newton to write everything down, not just for him, but for the world. Newton agreed, slowly, carefully. Over the next 2 years, he began to work day and night. He reviewed all his earlier thoughts, rewrote proofs, and built new ones. He connected gravity, motion, the moon, the planets, and even tides. He was no longer just solving problems. He was building a system to explain how the entire universe works. In 1687, his great work was finally published. The book was called Philosophia Naturalis Principia Mathematica. Most people just call it Principia. It was not just a book, it was a masterpiece. In its pages, Newton introduced the 3 laws of motion and the law of universal gravitation. The first law said that an object will stay at rest or in motion unless something forces it to change. The second law showed how force equals mass times acceleration. The third law said that for every action, there is an equal and opposite reaction. These laws are simple in words but powerful in meaning. They describe everything from a ball falling to Earth to planets dancing around the sun. They explain rockets, bicycles, airplanes, and even the way we walk. Then came the law of gravity. Newton showed that gravity was not just something that made apples fall. It was the invisible thread tying the whole universe together. Every object in the universe pulls on every other object with a force. That force gets stronger when the objects are heavier and weaker when they are farther apart. It was a beautiful idea, and it was backed by math. Suddenly, people could predict the path of a comet, the rise of tides, the orbit of the moon. Newton gave the world a way to see the invisible and to measure what had once seemed like magic. The book was not easy to read. It was written in Latin and full of advanced math and logic. But those who understood it were left in awe. Scientists and thinkers across Europe began to see Newton as the greatest mind of their time. But with praise came pressure. The Royal Society was proud of Newton. He had given England a hero of science. But not everyone was happy. Robert Hooke, still alive and still angry, claimed that Newton had stolen some of his ideas. He said he had spoken of gravity before Newton. He demanded credit. Newton refused. He believed his work was original. He knew how much he had suffered and worked alone. He did not want to share the glory. The argument between Hooke and Newton grew bitter. It became more than just a scientific debate. It was personal. Hooke sent letters. Newton sent letters back. Neither would back down. Newton became more private again. He hated conflict. He said, I see not what I wrote for, but to be troubled. At one point, he even threatened to stop publishing anything ever again. Yet the truth could not be hidden. More and more scientists confirmed Newton's laws through their own experiments. Slowly, the world began to understand that this quiet man had uncovered something enormous. He had shown that the universe was not ruled by chaos or mystery. It followed laws. It was like a machine, not cold or mechanical, but elegant, ordered, and beautiful. For the first time, people felt they could understand the cosmos with their minds. It gave hope. It gave power. And it all started in the hardened hands of one lonely man from Woolsthorpe. But even as Newton's fame grew, his personal life remained difficult. He never married. He had few close friends. Most of his time was spent in books and thoughts. He ate little, slept little, and sometimes worked so long he forgot the day. Some say he once stared at the sun for so long he damaged his own eyes, just to understand light better. His mind was strong, but his heart was still fragile. Fame did not bring him peace, only more pressure, and yet he kept going. Newton's world had changed. He had become the most respected scientist in Europe. Kings and queens wanted to meet him. He was honored, praised, and even knighted. But inside, he was still the boy who had once been left behind by his mother. Still the student who was bullied. Still the young man who chose books over battles. He carried those early wounds with him, but he also carried light, the light of knowledge, truth, and discovery. In the chapters to come, we will see how Newton moved beyond science, took power in government, faced deep personal struggles, and shaped the world not just through books, but through action. His journey was far from over. Chapter 4, From Scientist to Silent Enforcer. By the late 1600s, Isaac Newton was already a giant in the world of science. His Principia had placed him among the greatest minds in history. But Newton's journey was far from over. In fact, he was about to take a very different path, one filled with coins, criminals, and the heavy burden of responsibility. After years at Cambridge, Newton began to feel restless. He was growing tired of academic life. The lectures were quiet, the students uninterested. His curiosity had not faded, but he longed for something more, something new. In 1696, Newton was offered a position that surprised many, Warden of the Royal Mint. It was a government job, far from the quiet halls of science, but it was also a position of real power. The Royal Mint was responsible for producing England's currency. At the time, the country was in trouble. The coins were old, many were counterfeit, and people were losing trust in money itself. Newton accepted the role, not because he loved politics or wealth, but because he loved solving problems. The nation's money system was broken, and Newton, the man who once explained the movement of planets, was now asked to fix it. He moved to London and took the job seriously, more seriously than anyone expected. Most men in his position treated the mint like a resting place, a reward for past achievements. But Newton was different. He dove into the world of weights, metals, and math. He studied the design of coins, how they were made, how they were forged, and how they were faked. He found that England's coins were being clipped. People were shaving off tiny pieces of silver and melting them down. Others were producing fake coins entirely. Counterfeiting was everywhere. It was not just dishonest, it was dangerous. It damaged the economy, it hurt the poor, and it threatened the future of the country. Newton didn't just sit behind a desk, he went out. He visited taverns, he questioned blacksmiths, criminals, and even gang members. He disguised himself, collected evidence, and built cases. One of the most famous counterfeiters was a man named William Chaloner, clever, charming, and dangerous. He had tricked others for years. He made false coins, lied to officials, and even tried to get a job inside the mint to destroy it from within. But Chaloner made one mistake. He tried to outsmart Isaac Newton. Newton tracked his movements. He gathered over 100 pieces of evidence. He brought witnesses to court. He worked not like a scientist now, but like a silent detective. In 1699, William Chaloner was found guilty and hanged for his crimes. Newton had won, but he felt no joy. He did not like punishment. He did not enjoy power. He simply believed in truth, whether in the stars or in silver. After the Chaloner case, Newton was made Master of the Mint, the highest position. He stayed there for nearly 30 years. During that time, he led a complete reform of the coinage. He helped switch England from silver to gold as the base of its currency. He created rules and systems that brought back trust in money. And yet, all this time, he remained the same at heart, quiet, careful, and deeply thoughtful. While working at the Mint, Newton also continued his studies. He was fascinated by theology, alchemy, and ancient history. He read the Bible in several languages. He tried to understand hidden meanings in sacred texts. He searched for patterns in the past, just like he once searched for patterns in the stars. But not everything in his later life was peaceful. His conflicts with other scientists continued. Even after Robert Hooke died in 1703, Newton still felt challenged. Another scientist, Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, claimed he had discovered calculus before Newton. The battle between their followers became bitter and public. Newton didn't take it lightly. He used his power at the Royal Society to push his side of the story. He led a secret investigation, written by himself, though it appeared neutral, that declared Newton the true founder of calculus. Many believe both Newton and Leibniz discovered the method independently, but Newton couldn't accept that. He wanted to be first, to be right. And perhaps after all the years of pain, loneliness, and silence, he needed to feel seen. In 1705, Newton received a great honor. Queen Anne knighted him. From that day forward, he was known as Sir Isaac Newton. It was a proud moment, but also a quiet one. Newton accepted the title without show. He did not throw parties or give speeches. He returned to his work, as he always had. As the years passed, Newton grew older, but he never stopped thinking. He still spent hours at his desk. He wrote thousands of pages, many of which were never published. He studied the end of the world, the shape of the earth, and the movements of comets. One comet in particular became famous, Halley's Comet. Edmund Halley, Newton's friend, had used Newton's own laws to predict the return of the comet. It was the first time anyone had done that. And when the comet did return, it proved not just Halley's belief, but Newton's. The sky had become a clock, and Newton had given us the key. By the end of his life, Newton was not just a scientist. He was a symbol of reason, of knowledge, of the power of the human mind. Yet he never felt like a hero. He once said, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy, playing on the seashore and diverting myself now and then in finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." It was a humble thought from a man who had uncovered so much. Newton's later years were filled with reflection of his life, his choices, and the mysteries that still remained. He had given the world new eyes, new tools, and new hope. And though he had never married, and though he had no children of his own, the legacy he left behind became a gift to every child who ever looked up at the sky and wondered why. Chapter 5. The Ocean of Truth. As the years moved forward, Isaac Newton aged with quiet dignity. He remained a man of deep thought and few words. His hair had turned completely white, and his back began to bend under the weight of time. But his mind, that brilliant, restless mind, was still very much alive. He was now Sir Isaac Newton, the most respected scientist in all of Europe. Children were taught his name in school. Poets and philosophers wrote about him. Leaders from faraway lands visited England, hoping to meet the man who had touched the stars with numbers. But Newton himself was never fully satisfied, not with fame, not with fortune, not even with the knowledge he had discovered. In the final decades of his life, Newton became deeply spiritual. While others praised him as the father of modern science, he turned his focus toward ancient texts, holy books, and the mysteries of God. He read the Bible every day, not as a casual reader, but as a codebreaker. He believed that God had placed hidden messages inside Scripture, secrets waiting to be found. He studied Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. He searched for timelines, numbers, and symbols. He was fascinated by the book of Revelation and spent years writing about the end of the world, trying to calculate when it would arrive. But this wasn't madness. This was the same careful, methodical Newton, the man who had once unlocked the heavens with gravity, now trying to unlock heaven itself. He believed the universe was not a random machine. It was built by design, by purpose, by a divine mind. To him, science was not against religion. It was part of it. Every falling apple, every spinning moon, every law of motion was a message written by the Creator, waiting to be read. This idea filled him with wonder, the same wonder he had felt as a young boy in Woolsthorpe, staring out at the stars through his bedroom window. Newton was also obsessed with alchemy, the ancient art of turning metals into gold and discovering the elixir of life. He believed there were secrets hidden in nature, waiting to be uncovered, not just in numbers and formulas, but in the heart of the earth itself. He wrote over 1,000,000 words on alchemy, often using strange symbols and codes. Many of his notes were never published in his lifetime. For years, people saw these writings as odd or unimportant, but today scholars understand them as part of his deep curiosity, his endless search for meaning. And in that search, Newton grew lonelier. Though he had many admirers, he had few true friends. He had never married. He had no children. His days were filled with work, reading, walking, and moments of silence. Some say he became colder in his final years, harder, less forgiving. But others say he was simply tired, tired from carrying the weight of genius for so long. In 1727, Isaac Newton's health began to fail. He suffered from pain in his bladder and kidneys. His body, once strong from walking miles across the countryside, now struggled with every step. On March 20th, 1727, Newton closed his eyes for the last time. He passed away quietly in his sleep, leaving behind a legacy that would echo through the centuries. He was buried in Westminster Abbey among kings, queens, and the greatest poets of England. No scientist had ever received such an honor. At his funeral, men wept, not because they had lost a friend, but because the world had lost its brightest light. A monument was placed near his grave. On it were carved the Latin words, "Here is buried Isaac Newton, knight, who by a strength of mind almost divine, and mathematical principles peculiarly his own, explored the course and figures of the planets, the paths of comets, the tides of the sea, the dissimilarities in rays of light, and, what no other scholar had previously imagined, the properties of colors. Diligent, sagacious, and faithful in his expositions of nature, antiquity, and the sacred scriptures, he vindicated by his philosophy the majesty of God and expressed the simplicity of the gospel in his manners. Even in death, he was seen not just as a scientist, but as a man of spirit and humility. After his passing, the world began to understand the depth of what he had done. His laws of motion became the foundation for physics. His discoveries in optics changed the way we understand light. His invention of calculus became the language of science and engineering. More than that, his way of thinking, logical, careful, patient, became a new standard for the world. He had shown that the universe was not something to fear, but something to explore. A century later, Albert Einstein, one of the few men to reach Newton's level of genius, wrote, "Newton was the greatest genius who ever lived, and the most fortunate. Nature was very kind to him. Today, Newton's legacy lives on in every falling apple, every launched rocket, every telescope peering into deep space. His spirit walks beside every student who opens a book of physics. He is remembered not for being perfect, but for being persistent, for turning pain into power, loneliness into light, and silence into songs of the universe. As we leave this chapter, we remember Newton not just as the man who discovered gravity, but as the soul who proved that even in darkness, truth can shine if we are brave enough to seek it. Chapter 6, The Revolution He Left Behind. When Isaac Newton closed his eyes for the last time in 1727, the world did not go quiet. It did not return to the way it was before him. Instead, a new world had already begun, one shaped by the questions he asked, the answers he gave, and the light he had shined into the unknown. Before Newton, science was scattered. People believed in magic, in superstition, in shadows. They did not yet understand how the world worked. They looked to the stars and thought of gods. They watched the tides and believed in curses. They feared lightning, storms, and disease, not knowing that nature followed rules, patterns, and invisible laws. But after Newton, the world changed. Suddenly, the universe looked different. It looked like a machine, beautiful, complex, and full of meaning. It was no longer ruled by mystery, but by reason. Newton had shown that everything from the falling of an apple to the spinning of the planets could be explained. It wasn't magic, it was math. His book, the Principia Mathematica, became the most important science book ever written. It was studied in schools, translated into many languages, and placed in libraries across Europe. For more than 200 years, Newton's laws were the foundation of science. Other thinkers followed his path. They used his methods to discover new things. Engineers built bridges using Newton's ideas. Astronomers mapped the stars. Inventors created machines, guided by the same laws Newton had written. His influence reached across oceans and into every classroom. He had not only given the world knowledge, he had given it confidence. The confidence to believe that truth could be found, that the universe made sense, that the human mind, no matter how small, could understand the vastness of creation. In time, this belief became a movement. A wave of new thinking swept across Europe. It was called the Enlightenment, a time when reason, logic, and science began to replace fear, superstition, and ignorance. Newton didn't start the Enlightenment alone, but he lit the fire that kept it burning. Great minds like Voltaire, a famous French philosopher, helped spread Newton's ideas across Europe. Voltaire once said, "Before Newton, we groaned under the weight of ignorance. After Newton, we walked in the light." But it wasn't just about science. Newton had changed the way people saw themselves. If a boy from the countryside, quiet, shy, often alone, could rise and explain the universe, then maybe others could too. He became proof that greatness wasn't born in palaces. It could be found in anyone who asked deep questions and followed them with discipline. Still, Newton's work was not perfect. His laws explain much, but not everything. In the 1800s, scientists began noticing strange things, tiny errors in Newton's predictions. His laws didn't always work with very fast objects or very tiny particles. The stars near black holes didn't move the way they were supposed to. Light, it turned out, could bend. Then came Albert Einstein, over 200 years after Newton. Einstein respected Newton deeply. He called Newton a light that guides us still. But Einstein also found that gravity wasn't exactly what Newton thought. It wasn't a pulling force between objects. Instead, Einstein showed that space and time could bend. And this bending is what we feel as gravity. It was a new truth. a bigger truth. But even Einstein said that without Newton, none of it would have been possible. Newton had built the first bridge between heaven and earth. Einstein simply walked across it and built a second one. Even now in the 21st century, Newton's influence is everywhere. Every rocket that goes to space uses Newton's laws. Every engineer, pilot, and physicist studies his work. His ideas are used in satellites, skyscrapers, submarines, and smartphones. His mathematics are part of almost every machine in our world. But beyond the science, Newton gave us something more powerful, a way of thinking. He showed us that truth is not just something we believe, it's something we search for. That questions are not signs of weakness. They are the beginning of wisdom. That even in the darkest moments, a single idea can light the path. Many people imagine Newton sitting under an apple tree, watching a fruit fall, and suddenly understanding gravity. That story may not be completely true, but the lesson behind it is. Because the truth is, Newton didn't just see the apple. He watched it fall, asked why, and never stopped asking. Most people would have walked away, but he stayed with the question for years until he uncovered the law that holds the moon in orbit and pulls the ocean tides. That's who Newton was. Not just a genius, but a seeker. And that's the legacy he left behind. Not just in formulas or books, but on the hearts of every young thinker, every student, every dreamer who dares to ask, why? Chapter 7. The Silence Behind the Genius. To the world, Isaac Newton was a man of greatness, a symbol of genius, logic, and precision. He was praised by kings, studied by scholars, and honored in ways few men in history ever were. But beneath that glowing reputation, behind the cold brilliance of his discoveries, lived a quieter truth. Newton was lonely. He had been lonely since the beginning. As a child, he had been abandoned. His father died before he was even born, and his mother left him at just 3 years old to remarry. She placed him in the care of his grandmother, and for many years he carried a sense of emptiness, a quiet wound that never fully healed. He grew up without the warmth of a parent's love, without someone to tell him, "You matter," without someone to hug him when the world felt too big. That kind of pain doesn't disappear. It shapes a person. Newton became someone who lived mostly in his own mind. He spent hours alone, even as a boy, building mechanical toys, watching the sky, or writing in his secret notebooks. He wrote about how much he hated being treated unfairly. He held grudges. He remembered every insult. He once wrote, "I am a little inclined to be too much alone." And he was right. Throughout his adult life, Newton never married. He never had children. He rarely let people get close. Some scholars believe he died a virgin, untouched by romantic love. Others think he might have been afraid of rejection, of vulnerability, of being hurt again. He had friends, yes, but few real ones. Most of his relationships were built on work, and even those often turned into arguments. Newton was famously hard to please. He could be cold, sharp, and even cruel to people who disagreed with him. He once went years without speaking to a fellow scientist because of a disagreement. He didn't forgive easily. He didn't forget. But inside, he wasn't evil. He was hurting. He had poured his entire life into understanding the universe. And in doing so, he had forgotten to understand himself. While he uncovered the laws of gravity, motion, and light, his own emotions remained locked away. His notebooks reveal a man filled with fear, fear of failure, fear of being wrong, fear of being misunderstood. He constantly doubted himself. He once even wrote a list of all the sins he believed he had committed. The list was long. Some were small things like eating too much or not praying enough, but others were darker. striking my sister, wishing death upon someone. He judged himself harshly, and perhaps he believed that to achieve greatness, he had to suffer, and suffer he did. In his mid-50s, Newton had a mental breakdown. He stopped sleeping, stopped eating, and began writing strange letters to his friends. He believed they were against him. He accused one of trying to poison him. He thought he was being followed. Today, many historians believe he may have experienced depression or a form of mental illness. At the time, no one understood it. People called it melancholy or madness. But it was real, it was pain. And yet, even in his suffering, Newton never stopped thinking. He never stopped writing, searching, asking questions. The storm inside him was powerful, but it never drowned his light. He once said, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." A humble quote, but also a lonely one. Because in truth, Newton often felt like he had no one to lean on. He was the giant others stood on, not the other way around. And maybe that's what makes his story so powerful. Not just the science, but the struggle. He wasn't a perfect hero. He was a man full of wounds and wonder. He faced rejection, doubt, loneliness, and breakdowns. And yet he changed the world. He showed us that brilliance and brokenness can live in the same soul, that the most silent people may carry the loudest dreams, that sometimes the ones who feel most alone are the ones building bridges for all of us to cross. As we close this chapter, we remember Isaac Newton not as a cold statue of knowledge, but as a deeply human soul, fragile, feeling, and full of fire. A man who, despite all his pain, gave the world a universe to believe in. Chapter 8. The Crime Fighter of London. By the late 1690s, Isaac Newton had already transformed science forever. His name echoed across Europe. Scholars studied his writings. Students dreamed of following his footsteps. And yet Newton himself was restless. He had spent decades in silence, in rooms full of books and starlight. Now he wanted something else, something more real, more immediate, something where his mind could meet the world, not just the stars. And so, in 1696, Newton took a new role, one that shocked many. He became the warden of the Royal Mint. To most, this sounded like a boring job, something political, something ceremonial, a job for a tired old man. But Newton saw it differently. He saw a system that was broken, a country drowning in corruption, and he was ready to clean it up. In Newton's time, England's coin system was a mess. Coins were made of real gold and silver, which meant they could be melted down, clipped, or counterfeited. Criminals would shave the edges off coins, collect the metal, and then pass the damaged coins back into the market. Others made fake coins and filled London streets with them. The result? Chaos, inflation, poverty. The British economy was collapsing under the weight of lies. And Newton, the man who had once explained the movement of the planets, was now going to fight street-level crime. He didn't stay behind a desk. He went to the streets. He walked through the alleys of London, met with informants, interviewed witnesses, and collected evidence. He disguised himself, visited taverns, and followed leads like a detective. He kept secret notebooks filled with clues. He chased counterfeiters like a bloodhound chasing a trail. The most dangerous of these criminals was a man named William Chaloner. Charming, brilliant, and wicked, Chaloner was a master counterfeiter. He made fake coins so perfect, even experts were fooled. He was also bold. He publicly attacked the Royal Mint and tried to get Newton fired. But Newton didn't flinch. He investigated Chaloner for months, quietly, carefully, relentlessly. He built a case of such strength that Chaloner could not escape. He found witnesses, forged connections, and proved that Challoner had cheated the country again and again. In 1699, William Challoner was sentenced to death. Newton stood and watched the man be hanged, not with joy, but with the cold focus of justice. He had not done it for fame. He had done it for order, for the people, for truth. That's the kind of man Newton was, a man who could chase comets in the sky and criminals in the streets. During his time at the Mint, Newton helped recoin the entire currency of England. He made the coins more secure, introduced new designs, and brought stability back to the country's economy. It was one of the greatest financial reforms in British history. And though it wasn't as famous as gravity or calculus, it showed a different side of Newton. The leader, the protector, the one who stood against chaos and made the world safer, not just smarter. He later became Master of the Mint, the highest position. He held that job until the end of his life, and many say he was more proud of this work than even his discoveries in science. Why? Because it was real. It helped people. It didn't just explain the world, it made the world better. And maybe, just maybe, Newton felt something he had missed for so long: connection. For once, he wasn't alone in a study. He was among people, solving real problems, bringing justice, and finally being seen not just as a mind, but as a man. As we close this chapter, we see Newton not just as a thinker, but as a doer, a man who moved from the stars to the streets and proved that greatness isn't only in discovery, it's in courage, service, and action. Chapter 9, The Eternal Flame of Knowledge. When Isaac Newton passed away in 1727, the world did not forget him. In fact, it remembered him more with each passing year. His name became more than just a name. It became a symbol of what the human mind could achieve when it asked the right questions and refused to stop searching for answers. For more than 300 years, Newton's influence has never faded. His ideas became textbooks, his theories became laws, and his methods became the foundation of science education across the planet. Schools, colleges, and universities teach his work to children, teenagers, and scholars alike. His legacy lives in every classroom where a young person stares at the stars and wonders, why do they move like that? And that is the beauty of Newton's legacy. It invites wonder. Before him, the world of science was like a locked door. People didn't know how to open it. They were scared of the unknown. They relied on old beliefs, myths, and guesses. But Newton gave them the key, the method of observation, questioning, and experimentation. He taught the world not just what to think, but how to think. He didn't want people to blindly believe what he said. He wanted them to test it, to challenge it, to build on it. He gave science a strong backbone and the courage to admit when it was wrong and grow stronger from it. And because of that, science after Newton grew like never before. The way we learn changed. The way we teach changed. Newton's approach, breaking big problems into smaller ones, using logic and evidence, became the very heart of modern education. He inspired generations of thinkers. In the centuries after his death, many great scientists stood on the shoulders of Newton. People like Michael Faraday, who unlocked the secrets of electricity, like James Clerk Maxwell, who explained electromagnetism, like Charles Darwin, who revealed the process of evolution, and of course Albert Einstein, who once wrote, "Newton, forgive me. You found the only path which in your age was just about possible for a man of highest thought and creative power." Even Einstein, the giant who came after Newton, never denied the strength of the man who came before. Newton's shadow stretches across space and time. His equations still guide rockets, His methods still solve problems. His books still shape minds. The devices we use, smartphones, computers, satellites, they all owe something to him. Even medicine, engineering, and artificial intelligence trace their roots to Newton's way of thinking. And yet Newton was never in it for the fame. He didn't crave applause. He rarely attended parties. He often avoided praise. He once said, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy, playing on the seashore and diverting myself in now and then, finding a smoother pebble or a prettier shell than ordinary, while the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." That was Newton, a humble boy in the body of a man, a thinker, a wanderer, a quiet soul looking for deeper meaning. And maybe that is why his legacy lasts. Not because he wanted to be remembered, but because he wanted the world to see, really see, how beautiful, how perfect, how mysterious the universe is. He didn't just leave behind laws and books. He left behind a way of seeing. He showed us that learning is not just about answers. It's about questions. That education is not just about passing exams. It's about passing on curiosity. And most importantly, that the human mind, your mind, my mind, every young mind, holds the power to unlock the secrets of the universe, just like he did. As we close this chapter, let us imagine Newton not in a lecture hall, not under an apple tree, but in the hearts of millions of students, in every child who wonders how rain falls, in every teen who stares at the stars, in every dreamer who believes there is more to discover. Newton's mind may have left this world, but his light, it still burns, and it will burn for generations to come. Chapter 10. The Last Light of the Star. As Isaac Newton grew older, his body weakened, but his mind remained clear, sharp like the first light of morning. He had lived a life few could imagine. He had seen the secrets of the stars. He had felt the language of numbers. He had touched the edges of what it means to be human. And yet, he stayed humble until the end. He died quietly on March the 31st, 1727 in London. The world he left behind was not the same world he was born into. It was brighter, fuller, clearer, because of him. People from all over came to honor him, and even now, centuries later, we still do. He was buried in Westminster Abbey, the resting place of kings and queens, a place of honor. His tomb still stands there, silent but strong, a reminder that even the quietest voices can leave the loudest echoes. But Isaac Newton didn't just leave behind a name in stone. He left behind a legacy of light. His life wasn't perfect. He faced pain, loneliness, and failure. He had enemies. He made mistakes. But through it all, he never gave up on one thing: the belief that knowledge could change the world. And that belief is now your gift. Because his story is not just about science. It's about you, your curiosity, your questions, your dreams. Newton's journey proves that one person, even a quiet child from a small village, can change history with nothing more than a notebook, a thought, and the courage to keep asking, why? So if you ever feel small, if you ever feel like you don't matter, if you ever feel like the world is too big and your voice is too quiet, remember Isaac Newton. Remember the boy who once sat alone, building windmills out of scrap wood. Remember the man who watched an apple fall and saw the sky moving with it. Remember that one mind, lit with wonder, can light the whole world. As we say goodbye to this beautiful journey, take this with you. Never stop learning. Never stop wondering. Never stop believing that your thoughts matter, because they do. And one day, maybe your story will be told, just like his. Thank you so much for being part of this emotional journey through the life of Isaac Newton. If this story touched your heart, helped you learn, or made you think, please like, subscribe, and share this video with someone who loves learning too. Your support helps us keep sharing beautiful stories like this one in simple English for dreamers like you. Until next time, stay curious, stay kind, and keep looking up.